Let's talk about how close we are to potential World War III.
Way too close.
How could this end up in World War III?
I think a couple of different ways, right? You get to a situation where is a Russian red line crossed? They're a nuclear power. Do they start using tactical nuclear weapons in eastern Ukraine? If that happens, then at least some of the Eastern European countries like Poland have to get involved. That balloons into a World War III scenario. I think the most likely and the most dangerous scenario is Iran and Israel right now. What if in North Israel, a bunch of Iranian-backed militias start killing thousands of Israeli civilians? So the Israelis invade, do the Iranians counterattack, and now you have Israel, Iran in a regional conflict. And then the final thing, man, is China wants Taiwan, right? Everything that we have tells us the Chinese want Taiwan. America, I think, has left Taiwan in a really crappy position because we've sent all our weapons to Ukraine. The Taiwanese, I don't know that they could repel a Chinese invasion right now.
Joe Biden literally unfroze $7 billion that we had seized from the Iranian government like 25 years ago and gave it back to him. He literally turned the key and said, okay, you guys can have this money back. We're going to trust you, Iran, not to create a nuclear weapon, not to fund the IRGC, not to kill Americans, not to launch another war in Israel via Hamas, Hezbollah. You guys just report to us how the nuke stuff is going, because remember, these are the guys that want it back in the JCPOA, Obama's nuclear deal. How's that looking today? The Secretary of State for Joe Biden just said he can't tell you how close Iran is to a nuclear weapon, but he thinks they're pretty close. You let them do that. You know who they're buying their weaponry and stuff from? China, Russia, Venezuela. I mean, Trump's sanctions program on Iran was dominating. And there was a reason for that, because they would not play ball on terms of shutting down their nuclear program. And now they have nuclear fissile material enough to sustain a bomb. And the Biden administration has given them free rein. Now, the biggest threat kinetically is armed.
When you get into office, if you get into office, will you be able to sit Zelensky and Putin down and have them negotiate a deal so that we can spend the next $175 billion on our own infrastructure?
Two countries. Should have never happened. Would have never, ever happened. And it didn't happen. For 4 years, there was no talk about Russia going in. I knew Putin very well. Got along with him. They say, you got along with Putin? That's a terrible thing. He said, no, that's a good thing. He's got 1,800 nuclear weapons. So do we. When I hear these poor fools talking about global warming, they don't call it that anymore. They call it climate change. Go back many, many decades and look at Hiroshima, Nagasaki. That was so many years ago. And now you look at today and multiply that, what took place there, by 300, 400 times. The biggest problem we have, and the world has, is weaponry. And these poor fools talk about global warming all the time. It's going to global warm to a point where the oceans will rise an eighth of an inch in 355 years. You know, they have no idea what's going to happen to weather. I just wanted to have a deal with Iran. Very simple deal. Can't have a nuclear weapon. That's it. I want them to be happy. I want them to have great lives. I want them to have a great country. Can't have a nuclear weapon. Very simple. And I would have had that deal done within a week after the election. But the election was a disgrace to our country, another disgrace.
Strategic Command, it's the most important combatant command that almost nobody has ever heard of outside of Strategic Command, outside of the military structure. The commander of Strategic Command is in charge of the nukes. He's in charge of them. He's the steward of them. There's 150,000 employees beneath him in his chain of command. When the president needs to launch nuclear weapons, he communicates with the Stratcom commander. That's how important the Stratcom commander is.
Okay. And you got access to him.
I did.
And you guys had a discussion about this.
We did.
How did that start?
Origins, like very much, it's what I relate to about your podcast, like his origins, like how did you wind up the commander of Stratcom, right? And like he wanted to be a musician. So it's like a nuclear war could be triggered by any nuclear launch at the United States, period, right? So there are now 9 nuclear-armed nations. In my scenario, I chose a rogue launch from a ballistic missile, an intercontinental ballistic missile. Just like it sounds, it can travel from one continent to the other in 30 minutes. That's an ICBM. Launch to target. 30 minutes.
That's the farthest target.
33 minutes is actually from Pyongyang. 26 minutes and 40 seconds from Moscow to the East Coast. This is specificity. It doesn't change. All the new weapon systems, that doesn't change. That is what it was when they were invented. This is just basic physics. It goes up and over the earth and down. And so then once you know that, wait, that's all it takes? This is not a 9/11 scenario where, you know, someone whispers in the president's ears, sir, the planes have hit the buildings. It's not that. This on the cover here is a thermonuclear bomb called Ivy Mike. This is the first thermonuclear bomb ever exploded in 1952 in the Marshall Islands. It was a test. Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. This is 10.4 megatons.
Wow.
Think about that scale. An atomic bomb acts as its triggering mechanism inside the bomb. I interviewed the man who drew the plans for this bomb.
No kidding.
93 now. Richard Garwin. Talk about classified. His information was so classified, no one knew he even drew the plans to the bomb. He was 24 years old when he drew them.
Are you serious? Does he regret drawing them?
I asked him that question. I said, do you wish that you hadn't drawn the plans for the thermonuclear bomb? And he said to me, after a long pause, I wish they couldn't have been drawn.
Wow.
I mean, we could do a whole podcast on what that might mean. When the EMP nuclear weapon goes off earlier than that, launched into space by North Korea disguised as a radio satellite, it takes out the entire grid. That's what an EMP exploded 300 miles over the center of the country would do. It's a colossal failure of everything electric. And so, in essence, the ability to understand what anyone is doing outside what you can physically see disappears. We only know so much about history back to where people started writing it down. It's just guesswork before then, archaeological interpretation. So man, 5000 BC, figures out how to write. So we've had a 7,000-year run of history. And once all electronics cease, in the world in which we live today, just the information goes. Everything on your computer is gone. Mm-hmm. Who writes longhand anymore besides me and a couple of others?
Not very many people.
Not very many people. So China last year was reported to have 400 nuclear weapons. This year they have 500. That is deeply concerning. Mm-hmm. The Defense Department believes that in the next 10 years, China will have 1,500. Russia is not building new nuclear weapons, allegedly. Neither are we. India and Pakistan are understood to have about 165, I think it is, each.
Okay.
But when you really drill down on it, you realize that we don't really know. The transparency from them is limited, and how much intelligence the agency has on it is anyone's guess.
What about our allies? What about UK and France?
UK, I believe, has about 200, and I'm forgetting the exact number of France right now. But the UK is interesting because they have reduced their weapons systems down to only submarines, which is really interesting.
Do you have any idea how many nuclear weapons we have?
On ready for launch status, meaning they're forward deployed, meaning they can be launched in seconds or minutes from the president's order, we have 1,770. The numbers change a little bit every year. Russia has 1,674. That says nothing about the thousands more in storage that we have ready to, that could be pulled out. So we have approximately 5,000 each. Why do we need that many nuclear weapons? You must be asking yourself.
We need that many because they have that many. And they need that many because we have that many.
Guess what the number was at the all-time high, which was in 1986?
10,000.
70,000.
70,000? Wow.
There was one point in 1957, this bomb went off in 1952. At one point, we were building, on average, 5 nuclear weapons a day. DARPA's created in 1957-58.
I can't remember what it stands for, but basically DARPA is our advanced weapons.
Yes.
It's our advanced technology weapons, correct?
Defense Advanced Research Projects
There we go.
Agency, another mouthful, DARPA. It began in 1957 after the Russians launched Sputnik. We got caught by scientific military surprise. That was like a bad thing. Herb York becomes its first science director. The reason Sputnik was so threatening, it was a satellite, the Russian satellite, the first one orbiting Earth. The reason it was threatening was because it takes a rocket to get a satellite into space. If you can put a satellite in space, pretty soon you can put a nuclear warhead on that rocket and hit the United States. That was 1957. That's where everything changed. And so Herb York wanted to know in seconds and minutes how long it took for that ICBM to get to the United States. So he hired the smartest guys in the room, the Jason scientists, about which there are extraordinary many conspiracy theories. It was a 2-week-long program. SecDef, like the highest ranking people in military nuclear command and control, got together and gamed out these different scenarios, according to Professor Bracken. NATO was involved, NATO wasn't involved. Tactical weapons are involved, tactical weapons not involved. China gets involved. And what Bracken said was no matter how nuclear war begins, it only ends in nuclear Armageddon. And his exact words was that everyone left the war game very depressed. The nuclear war conundrum is so complex and tightly wound. It began with the generals and the admirals at the Pentagon in the 1950s working from an idea that nuclear war could be fought and won, which itself is insane. The original nuclear war plan against the Soviet Union that I write about in the book was going to kill 600 million people. Wow. 600 million people. How can you have a plan like that and not call it mass extermination? Our nuclear weapons are surprisingly analog, meaning they are not digital, okay? So, for example, I learned in reporting the book that our sub-launched ballistic missiles guide to the targets by star sighting, Sean. A little panel opens, and they use the stars to guide to the target. There are other systems in place, and this stuff is very classified. But what is leading is like this ancient technology that like our hunter-gatherer ancestors used. Nuclear weapons, because they happened before the advent of the digital age, there has been a concerted effort to make sure they remain analog so that they can't be hacked. And these are assurances that I have gotten from Cyber Command. You're just taking somebody at their word at that point because the documentation is not declassified. How does AI fit into the mix? If there is indeed a giant gap on purpose between AI being able to access nuclear weapons, that is one lane of security.
What does it look like if we're hit?
A nuclear bomb explodes with a flash of light, of X-ray light, that is so powerful and hot, it is impossible to comprehend. It is 180 million degrees. That's the temperature at the center of the sun times 5.
Really?
And so the thermonuclear flash sets everything on fire, depending on the size of the bomb. In the scenario that I write, it's 3 miles out.
Is that a fact? Is that the biggest?
That's not the biggest bomb, but that is a fact. When I write about these horrific details about what happens to people in third-degree burns and wind ripping skin off people's faces, 9 miles out, limbs being ripped off, the sucking motion that happens, the blast wave that's like a bulldozer. When I write all those details, those are not out of Annie Jacobsen's imagination. Those are sourced from primary document called The Effects of Nuclear Weapons.
Does that mean North Korea's nuclear weapons would also have to fly over Russia?
North Korea's nuclear weapons fly over Russia and China, but they do not have the same technology that we have, according to my understanding of the technology, to see neither China nor Russia in real time, the way that we see any ballistic missile launch anywhere on the globe.
If they do have somewhat of a capability and North Korea launches a nuke at the U.S. and it does have to fly over China and Russia, at least in our response, they would have some context and they could go, okay, we just saw one fly this way. Now we're going to see one head west. And so it wouldn't be 100% in the blind.
That is a possibility.
Now, with that being said, you're also, there would have to be some type of communications. And if we don't have
trust.
communications, if we can't even get our counterpart on the phone, then...
So nuclear winter theory was originally written in 1983. Carl Sagan was an astrophysicist who became very famous in the 70s and 80s, and then he died tragically of cancer. But he became a real proponent, an anti-nuclear weapons proponent. He and a number of people wrote this theory called nuclear winter, where they modeled out what would happen after the fires stopped burning. So you have, 2,000, 3,000 nuclear weapons that have gone off. And the modeling on that suggests that after all the fires stop burning, and this is state-of-the-art climate modeling, updated since the 1983 nuclear winter theory, the fires will loft into the air 330 billion pounds of soot. Goes up into the troposphere and blocks out the sun. 70% of the sun's rays disappear. Hence nuclear winter.
I wanted to ask you about the football. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so nuclear football, for people that don't know, if you ever see a picture of the president, chances are a few meters behind the president will be walking a military aide holding a leather briefcase. Yeah, I was standing in the West Wing one day with the president's military aide, and I jokingly said, let me hold that thing for a minute. And and to my surprise, he let me.
Are you serious?
So for about 5 seconds, I held the nuclear football at my side. There isn't a giant red button in there that you just crack it open and like, boom, and we go to nuclear war. The purpose is to verify the president's identity. So everywhere the president goes, he carries with him a little laminated card called the biscuit. On the biscuit, there are codes that are his verification codes for his identity. So in the event where there was an emergency where the nuclear football gets cracked open, the first thing that happens is communications are opened up to the National Military Command Center, and the president verifies his identity with the codes that are on the biscuit. I have heard it described in media as a Waffle House menu of pre-planned nuclear strike options.